Breaking news this hour, militants opened fire on a crowd of civilian protesters in eastern Aleppo, killing at least 17 and injuring dozens more. People were demanding to be allowed to leave the eastern rebel-occupied part of the city. Protests and clashes with police mark Barack Obama's visit to Peru for the APEC summit as the outgoing president makes a final pitch for the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. Also, the leader of the Russian Orthodox Church says Donald Trump's presidency opens up opportunities for a joint fight against terrorism. That's in an exclusive interview with RT. And as President-elect Trump starts to announce who'll take key posts in his administration, we look at the three he's chosen to date who all back legal moves against Hillary Clinton. Just gone midday here in the Russian capital this Saturday. This is RT International. My name's Ewan O'Neill. Welcome to the programme. At least 17 people have been killed and over 40 injured in eastern Aleppo after militants broke up a protest march with machine gun fire. RT's Lizzie Phelan reports on what we know at this stage.
Early this morning, the Russian Ministry of Defense has said that rebels in East Aleppo have killed at least 17 people, cracking down on yet more protests against militants blocking the escape routes from the besieged part of the city.
The militants dispersed the demonstration, shooting at protesters with machine guns. 17 people died on site, including 2 teenagers. Over 40 people were wounded in total. They also abducted 10 men they considered to have been the ringleaders and then shot them the same night.
Now, this statement is the only report that we have of these alleged murders, and indeed that protests took place on Thursday. There's no mention in the statement of which faction in East Aleppo is allegedly responsible for these killings. And RT has spoken to locals in East Aleppo, talking about the desperate situation that they're living in there and unable to escape if they indeed decide that that's what they want to do.
People came out here to demand that the terrorists let us get out. They started killing people, everyone who voiced their intention to leave this quarter. They killed up to 17 people. They killed children, women and elderly people. But in reality, there are no ISIL members. They are all from al-Nusra.
Many have fled, but there are still a lot of us here. All we want is to leave, to escape the violence. We can't live like this anymore. But they won't let us leave. They guard the humanitarian corridors and fire at those trying to escape. They've killed 28 people.
Well, as the situation in eastern Aleppo worsens, more and more calls for protests against the rebels' rule have been appearing on social media under the slogan, "Leave or let us leave." Investigative journalist Patrick Henningsen believes that the Western countries supporting the opposition groups are partly to blame for those atrocities.
The rebels, mainly dominated by al-Nusra Front, are using the civilian population as human shields in eastern Aleppo. This has been consistent reports all the way through. So this is a tragic event which has happened today and yesterday. It really underlines those reports, and this is an important factor that has just been completely omitted from all U.S. State Department statements. John Kerry, Samantha Power, Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary of the UK, and everyone who preceded them in their posts have just been, ignoring this reality. And this is quite a serious thing. This toxic policy that's been adopted, led by Washington over the last 5 years, if this had been curtailed at some point in the last year or two, then we wouldn't have this situation that we're seeing right now. They've been offering a lifeline to these so-called rebels now for far too long. And this is the culmination of it. These are the people that Washington says are fit to govern if they overthrow Bashar al-Assad in Syria. This is how they would govern. And I think now the public can see this. These are Syrian people on both sides, East Aleppo and West Aleppo. They're not pro-rebel, they're not pro-Assad. They are Syrian citizens, and clearly the ones in the East wanted to get back to have some semblance of life. They need food, they need shelter. They're tired of having East Aleppo occupied, and they tried to get out or tried to protest, and look what happened.
Moving on now, as Peru welcomes world leaders for an Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting this weekend, hundreds have gathered in the capital Lima to protest against the visit of Barack Obama. RT's Nikki Urin is there for us.
Obama's valedictory tour, his final international trip before he steps down as President of the United States. But it's a tour which has been marred by scenes such as this. People have come out here in the Peruvian capital Lima to tell Obama that they oppose his Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal, the initiative which Obama had touted enthusiastically as setting the gold standard for trade agreements. But observers say it may already be dead in the water. With President-elect Donald Trump due to take over on January the 20th, he's already said he opposes the deal. Obama's arrival in Peru comes after the European leg of his tour was met with hostility. In Germany, hundreds of thousands of people took to the street in anti-Obama protests to tell the president that they oppose pending agreements with the US and Canada. Meanwhile, in Greece, protests descended into chaos and violence. And if Obama is expecting a warmer welcome here in Peru, that expectation may be short-lived. Riot police have now surrounded the area where the protest is taking place. There's a considerable heavy police presence considering the amount of people actually taking part in the process. They're clearly not hoping for too big of a spectacle as Lima prepares to host the APEC forum this weekend. President Obama was undoubtedly hoping his farewell tour would end on a positive note. But if these scenes over the past few weeks are anything to go by, it could be anything but. This is Nikki Urin for RT, Lima.
Meanwhile, while flying to the APEC summit, journalists on board a plane carrying a Russian delegation were glued to their windows after their flight was intercepted and tracked by Swiss fighter jets upon entering the country's airspace. The pilots of the Russian plane, however, say that the practice of escorting special flights is not unusual. But for some passengers, it was a little too close for comfort.
It was really unexpected. 3 Swiss Air Force jets surrounded us, 2 on both sides, the 3rd from below. Several years ago, I was in a similar situation, also over Switzerland. But this time it was completely different. The planes weren't flying that close. This time it seemed as though the fighter jets wanted to force our plane to land. You know, normally journalists have steady nerves, myself included. But quite frankly, what we saw from the windows was enough to make one have a heart attack. Because one wrong maneuver, either by them or by our pilot, could have led to tragedy. We could clearly see one of the fighter jet's pilots. And when we were recording him, he noticed it and even waved his hand at us. He then moved somewhere to the left, but in a few seconds he was back beneath the wing of our plane. Emotionally, it felt very uncomfortable.
The president of the autonomous Iraqi Kurdistan region has said his forces will not withdraw from the areas they've reclaimed from ISIL. That's in line with an agreement he claims was made with the US. That may prove problematic for the entire anti-ISIL coalition, though, as Washington appears to have other ideas. The leader's announcement, which comes as fierce fighting continues around Mosul, has also been met with opposition from Iraq's Prime Minister. RT's Gaine Chichikan reports.
The president of Iraq's Kurdistan region, Masoud Barzani, says he has an agreement with the U.S. and the Iraqi government that Kurdish forces will not withdraw from the lands that they reclaimed from ISIL before the beginning of the Mosul operation. Barzani apparently feels very strongly about it because he said, quote, "These areas were liberated by the blood of 11,500 martyrs and wounded from the Peshmerga. It is not possible after all these sacrifices to return them to direct federal control." End quote. 2 days before Barzani said this, he had a meeting with the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, who said he's confident Kurdish Peshmerga will withdraw from the areas. So what agreement was Barzani talking about? Was there an agreement? Did the ambassador and Barzani misunderstand each other at that meeting? Were they lost in translation? The State Department has not answered those questions. Instead, said this.
What matters to us is, again, that this campaign is led by Iraqi security forces, that it's all under Prime Minister Abadi's chain of command. That's what matters most to us. There is no doubt that the Peshmerga have been and continue to fight bravely against Daesh. No question.
Iraqi officials say the Peshmerga will have to leave. We've seen a situation in Syria this summer when Syrian Democratic Forces, led by the Kurds, helped liberate the city of Manbij and were asked to leave, all while the U.S. praised their fighting capabilities.
The Kurdish Peshmerga forces are demonstrating significant skill and resilience.
I want to recognize the heroic sacrifices of the Iraqi and Kurdish security forces and their martyrs and their families.
Committed, capable. The Kurdish forces are what we aspire to with respect to their Iraqi security forces in general. They show the will to fight. They show the capability to fight.
In Iraq now, judging by Masoud Barzani's latest statement, the Iraqi Kurds are determined to stand their ground. The question is, can the anti-ISIL coalition afford to dismiss the Iraqi Kurds' plans and ambitions, considering Kurdish forces are an essential part of the ground operations to liberate Mosul from ISIL?
Well, Richard Becker is from the Anti-War Answer Coalition. He says that while coalition forces in Iraq may have one common enemy, ISIL, they all ultimately have different long-term goals.
Now the U.S., of course, wants to defeat the Islamic State in Iraq, or at least drive them out of the major cities of Iraq and Syria. And up until this point, it appears that the Kurdish Peshmerga forces in Iraq and the YPG forces, Kurdish forces in Syria, have been the most effective fighting forces against the Islamic State in those two countries. But at the same time, U.S. allies, like its NATO ally Turkey, wants to prevent the emergence of a Kurdish state either in Iraq or in Syria because, of course, Turkey is home to the largest Kurdish population in the world. And the Turkish government under Erdogan is currently engaged in seeking to crush the Kurdish people inside Turkey and does not want to see the emergence of a Kurdish state, as I said, in either Iraq or Syria. What we're seeing is that while at the same time those forces, the Iraqi forces, special forces, militias, the Kurdish Peshmerga, and U.S. special forces, and others perhaps, are fighting against the Islamic State, they also are very much in disagreement about what should be the outcome if and when the Islamic State forces are defeated.
Well, as the battle for the city of Mosul continues, thousands of Iraqi refugees have had to flee and set up home at the Al-Hol camp across the border in Syria.
All those people are trying to escape from ISIL, from coalition airstrikes, from Iraqi military forces.
It's so cold here. We don't have blankets, we don't have food. They don't give us anything.
It's difficult to get water. It's very bad here. We miss those close to us, our parents. We don't want to stay here. We want to return home.
The head of the Russian Orthodox Church says Donald Trump's foreign policy positions could pave the way for a joint fight against global terrorism. Patriarch Kirill spoke exclusively with RT's Daniel Hawkins.
Well, I met the Patriarch as he was preparing to mark his 70th birthday anniversary. We covered quite a lot of issues, really, in the interview. One of them, of course, being the election of Donald Trump, who's considered quite a controversial and divisive figure indeed by many people, both in America and around the whole world. And I certainly was interested in getting the Patriarch's opinion on the perspectives of Trump's presidency. He said he hoped that his election would pave way for a more collaborative, cooperative effort to fight the global threat of terrorism. Take a listen.
Judging by what Mr. Trump was saying during his campaign, he apparently has an intent to pave the way for dialogue with Russia, primarily regarding